Welcome everyone. Glad to see you on my channel. Today I will tell you about an unusual story, an amazing story about companionship and love. I wish you a pleasant audience.
A student drops out of school and against his parents' orders goes to live with an older lady, and a year later he goes to live with her. They were never supposed to meet. There was never a chance. Their lives are like planets orbiting far apart in different orbits. Harry was a law student with nothing to do at an expensive, fancy resort. He was brought here by illness. He'd been depressed the previous winter. It came on out of the blue. Yes, he'd been studying too much for days, sitting at night with his textbooks. Yes, he was in practice, where he saw such scum of the society that God forbid to meet them on a narrow path. And then, one day, he ran out of energy all at once. He lay with his back turned to the wall and stupidly looked at the geometric patterns of the carpet. He didn't want to do anything. Not to eat, not to study, not even to live. His mother and father were worried sick. Harry was their only late son, begged by fate. Soft, intelligent people, they never pressed on the boy. And if he was forbidden something, he understood perfectly well why. And everything that could be allowed to him was allowed. Whether to get a dog, to bring home friends with a sleepover, to go on a camping trip with the class. He never heard from his father and mother. No. It was the same with his choice of profession. Harry's mom worked for a while as a people's assessor. They're called nodders because they never challenge a judge's opinion or decision. But Mom had a girl crush on the judge, an attractive blue-eyed woman of about 45. Mom admired people who, despite a difficult life, retained optimism and a cheerful disposition. Judge Cindy was long divorced and raising a deaf daughter. Her husband left just because of the birth of such a sick daughter. Also, a member of their family was a huge Maine Coon cat. Theodore had a separate bed. In his litter box, he made a TV set. Once there was a newspaper with a program on it, and the cat took this newspaper as a special kind of invitation, meaning you can come here. The program was removed long ago, but the cat's bad habit could not be eradicated. They never turned on the TV. Cindy's daughter Angelica lived in a special boarding school and came home on weekends. Her mother was not going to marry anymore and gave all her energies to work. First, because she truly loved her work, and secondly, she was saving most of her earnings to take Lena abroad for treatment, surgery plus rehabilitation. Every day, Cindy had to judge people who had stolen something, or shared something, or beaten, or even killed. The cases she disliked most were those involving the division of property. When people who had previously considered themselves kin and were going to live together for the rest of their lives started fighting over a closet or some gold jewelry, and attacked each other with such fury that the civil case right there in the courtroom threatened to turn into a criminal case. One time, Harry went to get his mother too early and had to wait for her. A young man named Walker was on trial. He had just been released from the zone, returned to his mistress Selena, and was just beginning to taste freedom, so to speak. In the evening, they quarreled and Walker stabbed Selena. The ambulance came. Selena was drunk and didn't want to go to the hospital. They could barely convince her to get stitches. She wanted to stay with her Walker, who didn't understand why he'd taken up the knife. In the courtroom, they told each other they loved each other. "Selena, I'm sorry. I have no one more dear to me than you," Walker said. "I'm going to sit down again, and I'll be waiting for you." Selena pressed her hands to her chest. It was a side of life that Harry didn't know, that he had never encountered. Walker got 2 years, 10 months, and Selena was in the hallway excitedly discussing with her sister what to send him in the first transmission. Cindy felt sorry for him. Mom said as she and Harry drove home, gave him the smallest sentence possible. He's already been convicted once, but his girlfriend was on her knees, saying she had no grudge against him. Harry seemed to be thinking about something of his own, but was it not from this time that he began to read a different kind of literature from what he had read before? If he had been interested in adventure before, now it was replaced by detectives, books about elusive criminals, bloody maniacs, kidnappers, and domestic violence. In his senior year of high school, Harry told his parents he wanted to become an investigator. Mom freaked out. "It's dangerous. Can't you pick some more peaceful profession?" Father objected. "I don't think there's anything dangerous in store for Harry. I think he will work in our small town, and soon all romance will be dispelled." He'll have to investigate cases like the homeless man who broke into the apartment and stole a laptop to drink it away. So I wonder if this kind of routine work won't turn him away from the legal profession. Harry wasn't in the mood to open up, so he said briefly, "We'll see." And during his years of study, he had indeed had to see quite a few things that were too brutal, ruthless. Practical training would end, and again lectures would be replaced by seminars, and Oma had to deal with reports, prepare term papers, then look closely at the topic of the diploma. Harry never manked, studying every day until deep into the night, and in the end, from accumulated fatigue, there was the very nervous breakdown. He was covered with depression. Parents were alarmed, God knows where the money came from, and bought him a trip to an expensive sanatorium by the sea. Harry didn't even want to go. What difference would it make where he would lie for hours in the fetal position in a city apartment on the 8th floor, or in a single room 100 meters from the sea? But suddenly the change of place did him good. In the sanatorium, the doctor began to treat him the old-fashioned way. He did not appoint a young man expensive procedures, different their spa, healing climate, sea bathing, long walks, and drinks with soothing collections, which were given in the photo bar, had to do their job. And after a few days, it seemed to Harry that the air was indeed healing. He fell asleep easily in the evening, slept soundly at night, and stopped having nightmares. And early in the morning he was greeted by the sea, which was as clear as a tear and washed away all the negativity and heavy thoughts. Harry came to breakfast with a wolfish appetite and swept up even the milk porridge, which he had not liked before. His neighbors at the table were a father and his young daughter and a middle-aged woman. The little girl was pretty, her curly hair braided into 2 thick braids. Lucy chattered away very amusingly, and somehow it seemed that if there were peaches or cakes for dinner, everyone at the table was happy to give them to the little girl. Her daddy, Steve, smiled embarrassed and grateful. The middle-aged woman's name was Angelica. She was remarkably silent. It was clear that she was a wealthy woman. The jewelry alone was worth it. A large diamond sparkled in her ring, and earrings with the same gems attracted Lucy's admiring gaze. Angelica's short-cropped hair curled in fine curls. She dressed simply, but none of her clothes looked cheap. And she didn't wear the open things that women in the South love so much. No tank tops, no shorts, no short skirts. She always threw on a long-sleeved shirt or a jacket over her t-shirts. Angelique probably did this to hide her painful thinness. She seemed not just slim, but truly emaciated. Harry thought she must be on some fancy diet. Sometimes Angelica sat down at the table and drank only a glass of tea and left at once. Sometimes she would pick at the second course with a spoon without any appetite and set the plate aside. And it was rare to meet her eyes. If the neighbors at the table talked to her, Angelica answered, looking somewhere past, and her answers were always one-word answers, and her voice was quiet. It was as if she were afraid to say a word. Not once Harry did not meet her either on the beach or on excursions, and they were organized in the sanatorium almost every day. Angelica could be seen only on the farthest shady paths, and that is not immediately noticed. She sits somewhere on a bench, her face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat, enjoying the solitude. Harry didn't really care. He was glad he was starting to come alive. He was beginning to take an interest in life. For the first time in months, he was making plans. Periodically, all the vacationers in the sanatorium had to visit the doctor to check how the treatment was going, what the result was. Harry waited for his turn, sitting in the corridor. Angelica was at the doctor's office. The door was slightly ajar, and Harry could hear her voice, distinctive, slightly squeezed. "It's a great pity we weren't able to help you, isn't it?" Evan asked the woman softly. "Well, I guess if I hadn't come to you, I would have been worse off," Angelica said gently. "You haven't gained any weight. Your blood pressure's still skyrocketing," Evan said. "And the psychologist says your anxiety level hasn't gotten any lower, right?" Silence. Harry imagined Angelica nodded. "That's right," Evan summarized. "Until the root cause is removed, you won't get better. I would recommend that you see a psychiatrist when you get there. Chemistry should probably be involved by now. Have can find some medication." No, Harry had never heard Angelica speak so loudly and so excitedly. "I can't believe it. Even then, I had a hard time proving I wasn't mentally ill. That's the only reason he got a term. After all, he presented the case so that I made it all up. Unstable person, freaking out, throwing tantrums, jealous of him to everyone and everything. Plus, a rich imagination and the case is ready. But you didn't do it to yourself. Evan was still talking softly. It's still a basic fact. Didn't I tell you? He somehow convinced my friends, my ex-girlfriends, to testify that I've been weird since I was young, that I can cut myself and stuff. Well, I guess the doctor preferred not to go into all that. There was silence. Evan must have been writing. Buy the sleeping pill at the nearest pharmacy. It's a prescription drug, and at least the last days that you spend here, sleep and do not think about anything. And at home, I strongly advise you, let not a psychiatrist, let a psychotherapist, a private person. Nobody will put you on the register. But don't you realize you won't be able to live fully? You won't be able to enjoy life if you work on this problem. How much of that life is left, doctor? Angelica pushed her chair back sharply. A few moments later, the door swung open, and without looking at Harry, the woman walked briskly down the corridor. For some reason, all day long, the young man couldn't forget this conversation. He waited for dinner to see Angelica in the dining room. Usually she was always a little late. For dessert, they served very beautiful basket cakes with cream and fruit. Harry handed his to Ninotchka and glanced at the door every now and then, but Angelica never showed up. The next day, Harry went to the beach early in the morning as usual. He liked those hours when there was no one else there. Who on vacation would really think of getting up at 5 o'clock? There were only a few fishermen on the beach. But suddenly he saw Angelica. The woman was sitting on a chaise longue under the awning, although the sun was just rising. But Angelica was obviously trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible. She was wearing a flounced denim skirt, long up to her heels, and some kind of stretchy sweater that Angelica was wrapped up in. She sat with her arms wrapped around her knees and stared in front of her. Harry didn't want to disturb her and was about to make a discreet retreat, but then she looked up at him. They nodded at each other. "Morning. Can't sleep?" he said, because he had to say something. "As it turns out, not even pills can help me," Angelica grinned. Harry hadn't expected her to answer. She hadn't said anything about herself until now. "I've been sick of studying," he said, taking a seat on a nearby chaise lounge. "It's been a relief since I decided to give myself a break. Why don't you stop thinking about unpleasant things?" "How?" Angelica looked him straight in the eye. "Can you do that? Can you teach me how to do it?" Suddenly, tears came to her eyes. Angelica bit her lip and looked at the sea. He could not think of anything but the bano. There are no unsolvable problems in the world, only if someone died. "I'm dead," Angelique said. "Isn't it obvious?" Angelica grew up with a stepmother and once wanted more than anything to have a home and a family of her own. Although everyone around her admired her father, her stepmother, and all 3 children, Angelica and her 2 half-brothers. Her father is a scientist, a university professor, soft in family life, and a man passionate about science to the point of madness, a professor who forgot about food and sleep when it came to his favorite science. His first wife died a few days after Angelica was born. There was a not-so-rare reason the medics overlooked it. Later, someone changed the records in all the documents, and no one for this story was not punished severely, not suspended from work, and the grief-stricken professor didn't try to get justice. Perhaps from the very beginning, he wanted to bring up his daughter himself and not to marry again. But after a few years, he met a young woman whom he sincerely admired. Like him, Mary was in love with science, well-read, in short, lived a spiritual life, and all material things were of secondary importance to her. The professor very quickly made her an offer, and Maria was not afraid to marry a man with a child. 2 years later, she gave birth to twins and decided that she had had enough of children. Although the professor hired her an assistant from the beginning, still small children demanded too much attention. The housekeeper took over the household cooking, washing, cleaning, but the upbringing of boy's mother did not trust her. Maria wanted to raise her sons in her own image and likeness spiritual in the first place. It was impossible to value things too much, even on the fact that the child sometimes perceives toys as living beings. No discount was made. Several times a year, my mother would gather plush animals, cars, and the like into a large cardboard box and give them to a woman she knew, poor and with many children. And God forbid the boys would regret anything. Of course, new toys were bought in exchange for the given toys, and the boys were dressed not worse than their peers. But from a small age they knew it is impossible to dream about some thing's fashionable backpack or a wind-up ship, which itself will float in the bathtub, grinding water with a propeller, but about this or that book, or that recovered father who had a heart condition can dream quite possible. It didn't work with the boys. They obeyed their mother, at least for the time being. But Mary from the very beginning tried to apply this method of education in stepdaughter. But here she was disappointed. Angelica did not put up with punishments, cried. Once she even had a nervous seizure. Her father promised Angelica for her birthday the same lush princess dress, which was at the girl's friend's. Most likely, the professor didn't know what he was talking about at all. But he had the pleasure to go with Lenachka to the store and make her happy with the new dress. Angelica was so pleased with the gift made the day before for the birth that she put on the dress and did not want to take it off. When she was persuaded to change into a nightgown before going to bed, her stepmother took the dress and hung it in the closet in her room, which was locked. She said she would allow the outfit to be worn on holidays. Angelica, from whose hands the coveted thing was snatched, burst into tears so that her hands began to tremble, and the next day she had a fever. And instead of a holiday with cake, candles and balloons, instead of fun with her friends, Angelica lay in bed in a half-awake state. Then her father and stepmother had a long talk behind closed doors, and the stepmother gave up her stepdaughter's education. She forbade Angelica almost nothing anymore. The girl simply ceased to exist for her. If Angelique asked her a question, Maria said, "Ask your father." The professor was so busy, so far from real life, that very soon the girl had to become independent. Sometimes she asked her father about her own mother. Tears invariably came to the professor's eyes. Katia was so sweet, cheerful, with an easy character, that with her death all joy left the house. Apparently, Angelica had taken after her mother in many ways. She tried to arrange for two factions to form in the house. After all, Maria has sons, reasoned the girl, so and let her be with Steve and Austin. The three of them are not boring, and Daddy's mine. Otherwise, it's not fair. They're together and I'm alone. But the stepmother was quick to quash these claims of her daughter to her father's attention. She believed that no one could be closer to her husband than herself. They work together, they have common interests, and Angelica is growing up, and soon she will have her own life and her husband. Thus, the girl's friends replaced her relatives. She often stayed with them for several days. Her friends' parents did not object. In spite of everything, Angelica was well-mannered, friendly, always tried to help with household chores. Sometimes someone would say, "I would have such a daughter." Angelica only shuddered. Apparently, in the depths of her soul, it is very heavy. That unlike her peers, she didn't have a normal family, and she really wanted to have one. No one came to Angelica's graduation. The professor was very busy with some important meeting of the scientific department. He asked his wife to go to the school at least for the solemn part of the awarding of certificates, but Maria made a dismissing sign. "I haven't taken part in Angelica's education for a long time, and I don't want to be a hypocrite by participating in this celebration." The professor only shrugged his shoulders and smiled guiltily at his daughter Maul. Sorry for that. However, Angelica was already hardened by life, and she only grinned and expected nothing else. However, the behavior of her father, she still assessed as a betrayal, and the university for herself chose in another city. Her father rented her an apartment. Her stepmother never interfered if her father spent money on his daughter. "I know from my own experience, it is difficult to study well in a dormitory," the professor said. "You stay up late, bring friends, and if you are going to study seriously, you need silence and a working environment." He went with his daughter, visited her new apartment, gave a generous sum of money to Angelica to buy herself everything she needed. But when the girl became a student, her behavior changed. It was as if she got to all sorts of entertainment. Now she often lingered in nightclubs, carefree fun with new friends. They could drink so much that they could hardly call the cab driver's home address and boys for the evening to pick up and afford any other follies. And now Angelica dressed in a way that would never have occurred to her before. She wore bright, flashy things, and left her hair loose. By nature, she was very good looking, and she was never without male attention. Another thing is that now she remained as kind and trusting as she had always been. Arnold was introduced to her by a classmate. Nancy had a boyfriend and he had a friend. Why not sit together in the same company? They were already seated at a table in the cafeteria. The friend's boyfriend was running late, but when he showed up, Nancy's face stretched. She must have thought she'd made a mistake, picked up the wrong guy, a friend who'd stepped out of the pages of a men's fashion magazine. No, in this case, it didn't matter what he was wearing, but that hard face, grin, those bright eyes and black eyebrows apart. Young girls would paste pictures of such a Superman in their bedrooms. Strange that Arnold still didn't have a girlfriend. He willingly took on the role of Angelica's beau, until the end of the evening patronized her, pouring wine, laughing at her jokes, and when the party was over, escorted her home. Perhaps it could have been a few goodbye kisses, but Angelica saw no reason why they couldn't end a wonderful evening with an equally wonderful night. She took her new mate by the hand and led him back to her house. And indeed, the night was so intoxicating that in the morning they both didn't want to part. That's where it all began. The romance spun the most impetuous, and 2 weeks did not pass, as Arnold confessed to Angelica in love and asked to marry him. She was amazed at such a hasty decision, especially since, looking at his family, did not seek to get a stamp in the passport as soon as possible. Her friends meant the news differently. Someone that enthusiastically squealed and began to ask for a wedding, preferably in the role of a witness. Someone who has already seen the handsome Arnold and frankly envied. And the closest friend, Sophia, only shook her head. Sophia was not a prude at all. She happily partied at the same parties as Angelica and picked up one-night stands with the same ease, so Angelica was all the more surprised. I'm not getting married yet, but you should have seen how beautifully Angelica proposed to me. All honorable, on his knees, with a bouquet of flowers and a stunning diamond ring. Look. And Angelica showed me her hand with a dainty ring. I said I would think about it, she said with ill-concealed pride. And anyway, as long as I wear the ring, I will be faithful to him. What about him? Sophie asked. Well, it seemed to me that he was very upset that I did not give my consent at once. Angelica confessed. I think he imagined that I would be happy, throw myself on his neck and confess in return eternal love. Sophia shook her head again. I haven't had any experience of my own married life, she said, but I look around me. It's rare for guys that age to get married right off the bat. So far, I've only seen a few cases of young men proposing marriage like that. And you know who they were talking about. Alcoholics. Both of them were already incorrigible, or as they say, incurable. And they'd already tried marriage, but their wives couldn't take it for long. Are you saying Angelique drinks? Angelique laughed. I'm gonna disappoint you, but I'm a leader in this business. You know, I can't resist a cocktail sometimes, and he won't even take a sip because he's driving. What do you know about him? Sophie kept up. Well, his father left the family early. His mother raised him, but it was hard on her. She drove men around and didn't pay much attention to her son. Maybe that's what we have in common. Neither he nor I had a normal family. Maybe, Sophia agreed thoughtfully. But if I were to advise you to look for a husband, it would be among those guys who had a normal, good family, where the father is used to taking care of the mother and the son saw it. And I feel sorry for Linka, with unexpected seriousness said Angelica. He, like me, wanted home warmth, and his mother all her warmth gave to strangers' men. He hoped that she would at least give birth to another child, and he will have a brother or sister, which he will take care of. But no, he grew up alone, an orphan with a living mother. But still, you're not going to run off to marry him right now. No, of course, in Angelica's voice sounded worried notes. I'm already with these novels fountains of study run. I have debts for the last session, and I can't retake them. And I have to do it. It'll be a big blow to my father if I suddenly drop out of school. And it is he who pays for my apartment and gives me money to live on. Yeah, Sophia agreed. You've been fine up until now. But if you lose your allowance, you'll have to work part-time like many other students. Unfortunately, things turned out for Angelica in the worst way. When she once again came to retake the subject, the teacher, who already disliked her, tried to do everything to drive the girl into a dead end. He asked unexpected questions, demanded knowledge of additional material. Angelica spent several sleepless nights preparing for the exam, and now she had everything mixed up in her head. As a result, she got another D. In the educational department, she was told that in general, if she did not want to be expelled, she had two options: either take a leave of absence for some reason or go to a paid department. The girl was not satisfied with both options, but the second was worse than the first. Studying was expensive. She could not take on her father in this load. It remained to take an academy. A classmate, whose mother was a gynecologist, asked her to make a fake pregnancy certificate, and Angelica was given a leave of absence. The girl decided to get a job somewhere in a cafe, save money, and if next year will not be able to recover themselves to pay for their own studies at the paid department. But Arnold, having learned about what happened, began to insist on marriage with redoubled force. "You will not depend on his father," he persuaded. "I earn enough. If you want, you will study further. If you want not. Doesn't the prospect of being your own boss appeal to you?" Angelique resisted for a while. She did get a job as a waitress in a small restaurant, but she didn't last long. First, she was attacked by a customer who thought Angelica was too clumsy and slow. Then her co-workers accused her of cheating on her tips. In this restaurant, it was customary to give tips to a common pot and then to distribute them, and most of them were given to those who had been working here for a long time, while the newcomers got crumbs. This unwritten rule seemed so unfair to Angelica that she actually withheld some of the money that she was given by visitors. In short, the girl flew out into the street, and that's when she went to the registry office with Arnold. They took the application, and the shining groom asked her what kind of wedding she wanted. "Something more modest," Angelica asked, as she didn't want to spend a lot of money on all the tinsel. "I'll be fine if we get a table somewhere. I wouldn't want to play the main role in this play, where everyone will stare at you," she said. "Rather at you," laughed Angelica. "It is you beautiful as a movie star, not me. I will be envious. By the way, I haven't been to your house yet. You haven't introduced me to my relatives. My relatives live on the other side of the country and are unlikely to come to the wedding. I'd love to show you the house next weekend, only now it seems too small. I never thought about it before, but now that I've met you, I want a big, very big family." Angelique only laughed. No, she didn't mind having children, but first he had to get his diploma. The day before the wedding, he made her a present and they were to go on a wedding trip, but it was supposed to be special as he was. He rented a cottage by a lake in one of the northern regions. "But you can't go swimming there, can you?" Angelique mumbled confusedly. She assumed that after the wedding they would go somewhere, but imagined that it would be the South, maybe Turkey, or one of the European countries. Sea, sun, fruit, a room in a nice hotel. They would get up at dawn and walk along the beach, holding hands. But Arnold even grimaced. "There are so many people there in season. You won't find any privacy. The beaches are jammed, the excursions are crowded, and I want us with you, no one to interfere." And after a few days, Angelica was convinced that her husband was right. He chose a wonderful place, a secluded cottage in the woods, surrounded by huge picturesque fir trees. How wonderful the smell of pine needles. It took a few minutes to walk along the wooden planking to the lake, and there you could sit on the bridges and admire the view as long as you liked. The water in the lake was the clearest and not so cold. They enjoyed swimming several times a day. The cottage was small, but Angelica fell in love with it. 2 bedrooms, the second one was obviously superfluous. A cozy kitchen decorated with wood, and a living room with a panoramic window and a fireplace. The ceiling-high refrigerator was filled with groceries, and the newlyweds didn't need to go to the nearest town, although it was a quarter of an hour away by car. Angelica had never had such a good time. They did get up at dawn, had coffee on the terrace, and then the whole day belonged to them. You could walk along the forest paths, discovering new picturesque corners. You can splash as much as you like in the clear, clean water. On rainy days, they could read by the fireplace, listening to the sound of the rain. And that night they spent under the open sky, covered with a single plate, while a boundless river of stars flowed over their heads. Angelica had forgotten to bring her birth control pills. Going through the small medicine cabinet, she discovered they were missing, though she thought she had put them with her medication. At first, she was saddened by this. Then she waved goodbye. She felt so good next to Arnold that she mentally waved it off as it would be, as it would be. She was that her husband would solve any problem. With him, she would not have to think about daily bread or that the child lacked something. In this corner of paradise, Angelica, as if rested for all the past years, felt truly loved and desired. So she was not too eager to return to normal life. But Arnold promised that she was in for another surprise. And he wasn't wrong in promising that his house would delight her. She had not expected her husband to be so wealthy. It was a beautiful mansion on the outskirts of town. The place is not too promoted. This is not the waterfront, but near the forest. You can look at it, looking at it, remembering the wedding trip. A high, blank fence, an automatically opening door. "I'll be safe for you here," said Arnold. "No one will steal you away from me." "Who needs me?" said Angelica, and went to inspect her new possessions. The house was not so big. On the first floor, kitchen and living room. On the second floor, 3 rooms. A bedroom, a study, and the third Arnold had said would be a nursery. Last of all, he showed her the basement, most of which was a gymnasium, and there was a small room Arnold said was for storing junk. Angelica's eyes shone as she mentally imagined how she would make this beautiful house the most beautiful house in the world. She didn't know exactly how much Arnold earned, but she was sure that it would be enough for various transformations, and she'd be working soon too. "Don't you have any black to find me a place?" she asked at dinner. Angelica always tried to turn dinner into a little celebration. Not only cook something tasty, but also beautifully set the table, be sure to put glasses, poured wine. And the conversation under such a feast was usually the most pleasant. But now Arnold looked up at her with surprise. "And why do you work?" "Well," as confused Angelica, "I always thought that I should not sit on the neck. You're not sitting on my neck. And I always thought that I will patronize and pamper my wife, and she will not have to work for someone else's uncle and tolerate his whims." Angelique was very pleased to hear this, and the conversation ended there. A week later, however, the young woman returned to him. Now Arnold went to work every morning, and Angelica spent the whole day alone. In addition, her husband returned always at different times, cannot guess at what time to cook dinner, so that everything was hot. "I'm thinking about working," she said once again, poured her husband a coffee, and added, "Well, that I am here all day alone. Ni will not be a day long to watch TV or read. I would at least get my license. I could go to my friends or go shopping. And if you were babysitting, would you be bored too?" Arnold looked at her carefully. "Well, it's different." Angelica even laughed. "My familiar girls say that the first time after childbirth, and so go like a zombie with one single dream to sleep." "So why do you need to get a job now to go straight to maternity leave?" asked Arnold. "But I still want to finish the institute first." "You can't even imagine what a disappointment it will be for Daddy if I don't have a diploma," Angelica protested. "Daddy only lives for his science." Arnold just shrugged his shoulders. A few days later, Angelique took a test and found out she was pregnant. Arnold organized a real celebration. Angelica wanted to invite Sophia, her closest friend, but he objected. "This is the most important moment in our family's life. We don't need outsiders." But there were flowers and very expensive champagne and ice cream, Angelica's favorite sweet, which she preferred to cakes and pastries. Arnold immediately said that she will be observed and give birth in a private clinic. No flow, a doctor who will lead you from the very beginning and up to labor, the most attentive attitude, a separate room. Of course, Angelica could not but be grateful to her husband for such care, but the privacy was already beginning to weigh on her a little. However, the doctor to whom she was brought, Arnold, sent Angelica to all sorts of examinations, and the results were not too pleased. "You look healthier and stronger than you really are, but things aren't going so well. Is the baby in danger?" Angelique was afraid. "Not if you follow all the recommendations. The doctor told me to stick to bed rest. At any moment you may feel dizzy, uncoordinated. You need to be able to sit up or lie down. Do you understand?" Affectionately asked his wife Arnold, who was present at the examination. "So out of the house, dear, nowhere. Just in case, so that you do not run away. I will take away your keys." He turned the matter into a joke, but soon Angelica did indeed discover that a set of keys was missing from her purse. "It's not funny," she told her husband. "You're away for so long. I might need something." I'm not gonna turn into a prisoner with no freedom. When the baby comes, everything will change, he promised her. And Angelique had to accept it. When he left in the morning, Arnold locked the gate securely, so that Angelique really felt like a prisoner, locked in four walls. But at least I can have visitors. She couldn't stand it. Arnold raised his eyebrows. Who do you want to see? At least Sophia we have not met for ages. He thought for a few moments. Okay, invite her over for the weekend when I'm home too. Sunday evening went wonderfully. Sophia had brought good wine and some toys for the baby. For growing up, she joked. The couple gave her a tour of the house, and then they sat together on the carpet in the living room, sipped on light, sweet wine, and talked. Sophia had a lot of news to tell. Angelica, too, wanted to talk about her life, to complain about how much she missed. But Arnold was sitting next to her. It was uncomfortable in front of him. If only he had gone somewhere else, even for a quarter of an hour. But he never left his girlfriends alone. True, he behaved with extraordinary gallantry and tried to charm Sophia. The only moment to be alone with the girlfriends fell when Sophia asked to go to the bathroom. I'll show you to the bathroom. Angelica jumped up. How do you live? Sophia asked as she rinsed her hands. Even though Arnold was standing under the door, he couldn't hear anything over the noise of the water. Is everything okay? Well, yes. Angelique wanted to tell him how much she missed him, but she was afraid Sophia wouldn't understand. After all, the way she was living now was because of Arnold's care for her. I thought you were locked up like a bird in a cage, didn't I? Sophia looked at him with a sidelong glance. He's certainly good. You're macho man. But if you decide to run away from him, I understand. And by the way, if you want, you can stay with me. Sophia had a small studio apartment where she had lovingly designed every corner. There was room for bookshelves and a good record player and even a small bar. And the lodges Sophia glazed and arranged there a study combined with a greenhouse. But only a baby crib will not fit there. And yet Angelica had tears in her eyes. Sophia, it turned out, understood her. Thank you, she whispered. That same evening, already going to bed, Angelica asked her husband, can Sophia come to us more often? Out with her much more fun. I then nowhere will not be asked. If she'd hoped to placate her husband with this, she was wrong. Your girlfriend will not come to our house again, Arnold said. Why not? Angelique was dumbfounded. You should have thought of bringing wine to a pregnant woman. So I almost and did not drink. Began to justify Angelica. So, at the bottom of the glass. That's all I let you have. If she shows up next time without me, how do I know what she'll bring with her? Maybe a bottle of whiskey. I assure you, she wouldn't even think off. I say she would. You're a kind soul, and you don't know how jealous people can be. If something happens to your child, your Sophia will come for you and in her heart be glad it happened. You don't think she's jealous of you now? That you have a husband, a great house, that you're pregnant. What does she have? A job and a room the size of a dog kennel. I bet she drinks a lot and would sleep with anyone she meets. Angelique was hit with a wave of icy resentment. You don't know her at all, she said coldly. You've never told me anything about your family. When I asked you about it, you just gave me one-word answers. But I can tell you about my family. I had no mother. I grew up with a stepmother. And I never had a sister. Now, Sophia is the sister I've been missing all my life. And she used to take you to all sorts of parties, all sorts of hot spots, didn't she? What kind of hot spots are you imagining? If we went to caves or nightclubs? Then I'm in the right place. You know what kind of people go there. The men came to touch these girls. I'm a girl. Angelica squinted her eyes. I didn't say that. But with this Sophia, you could behave like the last girl. Look, I'm not asking you where exactly you work and who surrounds you there. You know I run a security firm and they're all men. So maybe you're having affairs with them. Angelica asked in anger. He whipped her on the cheek. No one had ever hit her before, and to lay a hand on a pregnant woman, Angelique recoiled and cried. There is no greater insult to a man than what you just said to me. Arnold walked out, slamming the door. Angelica cried for a long time. But the room was so quiet, there was not a single sound, and she gradually began to calm down. The very surroundings had a calming effect on her. It was so beautiful in her room, all in soft pink colors. In the end, she came to realize that it was largely her own fault. Men have certain points, red lines that mustn't be crossed, and she must have broken an unspoken prohibition. And yet Angelique thought her husband would apologize to her, and she would try to forget this terrible scene. That night she and her husband spent apart. Angelique suddenly fell asleep soundly after many tears. Several times she woke up, and each time she checked if Arnold was there. It seemed to her that he should definitely come, because loving people always understand if they hurt another and try to earn forgiveness, even if they are not guilty. But Arnold did not come. In the morning, Angelica heard that her husband was going to work. She couldn't believe he would just leave. Besides, she was hungry. So she casually walked into the kitchen where he was finishing his breakfast. She poured herself a cup of coffee and made a sandwich. "What should I buy today?" Arnold asked as if nothing had happened. "You'll write the list." She usually gave him a shopping list, except for the first few days, when she was so nauseous she was lying down. But now Angelica's eyes widened in surprise as Arnold seemed to have forgotten everything that had happened yesterday. "You hit me," she said. "Me?" He was surprised. "It couldn't have happened. You had a bad dream. Don't you remember anything?" "No," he shook his head. "But if I upset you, I'm sorry. So what should I buy today?" Angelique made a short grocery list. When her husband left, she wanted to lie on the couch with her phone as usual. Lately, she was used to reading books from digital libraries, but she couldn't find her cell phone. In vain, she looked for it all over the room, checked the bathroom, looked in every corner in the living room and kitchen. There was no cell phone. She remembered that there was a landline in the house and decided to call her own cell phone from it. Then she would hear a familiar tune and find the missing cell phone. But it turned out that the landline was disconnected. That day, Angelica was extremely bored. She didn't know what to do until her husband came home. She had long since gotten used to television. She could only walk in the small garden. She couldn't go outside the fence. The gates were locked. Hell, she can't even contact Sonia. If the cell phone is somehow lost, Sophia could buy her a new one and she'd give her girlfriend the money later. When Arnold arrived in the evening, the first thing Angelica asked him was if he knew where the cell phone was. Though in her heart she was sure he would answer no, she was all the more taken aback by his words. "You don't need a phone." "How's that?" She sat up like that. "You'll call your friends, discuss your life with me, and I don't want anyone to gargle my name, especially dirty girls like Sophia. And you say you don't remember yesterday's scene," Angelica summarized bitterly. "I'm afraid it will be exactly the same today. I don't know what you mean, but all that cell phone service and radiation, I don't think it's good for the baby." Angelica laughed, but it sounded almost hysterical. "Understand, today is not the Stone Age, and everyone has a cell phone. I do not part with mine." I know his voice was calm, like he was talking to a baby, but it's not good for you. Look at yourself right now. Your nerves are shot, and I need to keep you safe from any anxiety. Give me the phone and I'll calm down. "I got you something else." Arnold went out and came back with a small flat box. "You say you mostly read books on the internet. I bought you an ebook, and at my request, they uploaded 100 detective stories and love stories. When you've read them all, tell me and I'll update your library. But that's not the same. And you have a TV for news. What else do you need?" "I need a way to get in touch with someone. You've been gone all day. In case something happens to me, I get sick. I'd have to call an ambulance, get you home from work." "Now I won't leave you so long," Arnold said affectionately. "I'll stop by in the middle of the day to see if you're all right." And he really began to visit her once or even twice a day. He always came at different times and did not stay long, sometimes only for a few minutes, to make sure that everything was all right. Angelica paced around the room. The ebook was no substitute for the internet. She realized that she had complained about loneliness for nothing before. She could sit on forums, chat in chat rooms, she could contact Sonia through social networks. Now she was deprived of all that. The books her husband had downloaded for her turned out to be cheap reads and couldn't occupy her thoughts. Does he really care for me that much? She asked herself, but it's the caring that really chokes me. Hormones were probably affecting her too, because she didn't recognize herself. Every now and then she began to cry like a hurt child and felt very unhappy. A few days later, Angelique said to her husband, "I can't go on like this. I'm leaving you." He was just finishing his lunch. He was finishing a chop with green peas. Arnold raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Where are you going to go?" "You don't have to worry about that," she replied defiantly. "I understand," he said calmly. Now he spoke to her only in that tone. "You wanted to live with your Sophia until the divorce, and then you had a child, got a job, and received child support. Am I painting the right picture?" "So what? Thousands of women live like that." Angelica lifted her chin. "But you're not gonna live like that. First of all, you're not going anywhere because you're carrying my child, and I'm not going to let you steal it from me." "I'm not going to steal." Angelique realized for the first time that her husband might not let her go. Just like that, and not let her go, you'll be able to see him. He shook his head. "I don't like it." "But don't you realize you've made me miserable? You're not yourself right now." Arnold poured them both a cup of coffee without hurrying. "Then, when the baby comes, you'll think you're crazy for a while. It'll get better, you'll see. But you can't forbid me to leave. You're a free man, but so am I. You're sick now." Arnold tried to stroke his wife's hand, but she pulled her away. "And the sick are taken care of without asking for their consent." "I'll leave," Angelica said, not so confidently. "No, you won't, but if you want to try." When Arnold left, Angelica walked around the castle one more time and realized that her husband was right. Maybe a man trained and physically strong would be able to get out of here, but not a pregnant woman whose eyes darken every now and then, and to whom physical effort is contraindicated. The wall is high and topped with metal spikes. She doesn't have a phone now. The gate is on an automatic lock. The house is set back from the other buildings, and there's no way anyone would hear her if she screamed. Besides, it would be much easier for Arnold to make her look crazy. Angelica remembered an acquaintance who had an elderly mother. In the mornings, Veronica would go to work, and the old woman would open the window and scream that she was being killed, calling for help. The daughter was most afraid that her mother would fall out and eventually put bars on the windows. The mother was given sedatives, but nothing helped, her screams echoing down the street. Another thing, neighbors were aware of what was happening and did not rush to help the old woman. Nevertheless, Angelica tried to climb up to the attic. The roof of the house was flat, and part of it was a kind of observation platform. But Arnold had provided for that. The entrance to the attic was locked. The young woman cried once more. In her heart, she hoped that she would find a way to somehow get out, and today she would be among her own people. But it turned out that escape would have to be postponed until later. At the very least, she'd run away from the hospital, or better yet, she would tell everyone who would be near her, the doctor, the nurses, the women in labor, that Arnold had turned the house into a prison, kept her in prison all through her pregnancy, and now it was necessary to help her leave the maternity hospital with the baby unnoticed. Angelica didn't much care where she went. She could stay at Sophia's house for a while, cramped but not uncomfortable. Then maybe she could find some work so that there would be enough money for a nanny for the baby. At the very least, she'll move in with her father. He wouldn't kick her out of the house. Thoughts of her father brought her back to the institute, which Angelica had forgotten all about. Dad still thinks that she is studying, sends money for the apartment, and they are saved on her card. But Arnold has the card too, as well as all the family documents, passports, policies. He hid it all in the home safe, under the pretext that the absent-minded Angelica is nothing to lose documents at the most inopportune moment. When we get to the maternity hospital, and it turns out that he left everything at home and cannot immediately remember where the passport is, then when Arnold told her all this, his words sounded like a joke. But now Angelica realized that another bolt had appeared on the door behind which she was figuratively locked. Nothing. If she could escape, Sophia would give her money for a cab, and her father wouldn't ask his own daughter for papers. If Arnold won't give her passport back, Angelica will recover it later, say she lost it. Why don't we try another way for now? Give up food. If she goes on a hunger strike, Arnold will have to do what she wants. After all, he's expecting this baby. He won't let Angelica starve. It could be bad for the baby. That day, she did not prepare dinner. When her husband returned, Angelique sat in her room on the wide windowsill and looked out of the window. It was raining. In front of her eyes was a fence and wet lilac bushes. She knew her husband would make sure there was nothing to eat now. If he made a scene, well, Angelica was prepared for that. Instead, Arnold was rattling something in the kitchen. Half an hour later, he walked in on her. "Let's go to dinner. Everything's on the table." "I'm not hungry," said Angelica, without turning from the window. "Are you not feeling well?" He became alarmed. "You can take it that way. There's hot soup and rolls waiting for you, and coffee, of course." Angelique was very hungry, but she was sure she could stand it. She shook her head negatively and said, "I won't go." "If you do not break the regimen," Arnold continued to talk to her like a child, "then at the weekend we'll go somewhere. We'll walk in the park, have ice cream. You've really been sitting at home." Angelica couldn't believe it. Arnold could not realize that, once outside the gate, she would immediately leave him. She would jump out of the car for that matter. Yes, he nodded. "I'm not kidding." "All right," Angelica said. "I'll be right down." She cleaned herself up a bit, washed and combed her hair, changed her pajamas for a robe. She didn't like to walk around in her robe, but until now she had been in such a bad mood that she didn't feel like doing anything. Now was a different matter. "So pull yourself together," her husband told her at dinner. "If you don't feel well, of course we won't go anywhere. But if everything is fine, then I intend to treat you a little. We'll go to the stores and buy you something, because soon you won't be able to wear your usual clothes." It was Monday, and all week Angelique had behaved exemplarily. Now she had no doubt that she would be free before the deadline. She did the usual household chores, and at the same time her mind was full of thoughts. If Safia had guessed and come to her house when her husband was away, they could have talked over the fence. Maybe somehow a friend would have given her the phone. But in any case, Sophia would not refuse to take her in. Angelique had no doubt about that. On Saturday morning, Angelica looked at her husband as if asking what their plans were for today. "Unfortunately, I have to work today," Arnold said, finishing his second cup of coffee. "Do you remember what you promised me?" The young woman couldn't stand it. "Why?" He pretended not to remember, but then laughed. "Of course, I know how much you're looking forward to it. We'll go tomorrow right from the morning." Sunday was rainy, but Arnold wasn't about to cancel the trip. First, he brought Angelica to the country square. The rain had already stopped drizzling, but there was not a single person in the alleys. The young woman was very disappointed by this circumstance. If she simply tried to run away from Arnold here, he would catch up with her in a few seconds. And there was no one to turn to for help. At that time, her husband got a phone call. "There's been a slight change of plans," he told Angelica. "I have to be in the office now, but..." The "but" took forever. "You can go shopping on your own. I'll give you a card. Do you mind?" Angelique could only nod. "I'll give you 2 hours. "And you knew that she left?" Angelica asked with only one lip. "Of course I knew. Otherwise, I wouldn't have offered you that walk. You're such an asshole. Now let's go home," Arnold continued calmly. Shortly before, Angelica had been wondering when she was going to give birth. Would it be possible to keep from screaming? Screaming in front of everyone seemed very embarrassing to her. But now she was screaming. "Help!" Arnold squeezed her hand tightly. "Do you want me to call the psychiatric team? I have a friend who works there. He's aware of the problem and will arrive faster than the police if you expect the neighbors to call it. The psychiatrist will tell the cops you have a diagnosis and a caring husband will drive you. So I suggest you don't embarrass yourself and don't make yourself look crazy in front of a lot of strangers." With her head down, Angelica followed her husband. The change of emotion was too strong. She felt sick, barely able to stand. Arnold's car was parked in the driveway. He loaded his wife into the back seat like a thing. In the mirror, Angelica saw his grin. She closed her eyes and didn't open them the whole way. She really felt no longer a person as before, but an object that belonged to the owner. Lowering her head, Angelica followed her husband. The change of emotion was too strong. She felt sick. She could hardly stand on her feet. Arnold's car was parked in the driveway. He loaded his wife into the back seat like a thing. In the mirror, Angelica saw his grin. She closed her eyes and didn't open them the whole way. She really felt no longer a person as before, but an object that belonged to the owner. Angelique had become depressed. Now she didn't do housework, she just didn't leave the room. She lay all day long, turned her back to the wall and kept silent. When she did have to get up to go to the restroom, she felt herself weakening quickly, and it was a pleasant sensation. Angelica wanted to sink into oblivion as soon as possible and so leave this world. And the last thing she wanted was for Arnold to disturb her and speak to her. But the day came when he came and put a chair beside her bed and sat down. "It won't go on like this," he said. "If you don't eat, you won't last long." Angelica jerked her shoulder without turning around. She made it clear she didn't care. "Now you're definitely mentally ill," Arnold continued. "And if you don't do something about it, you're not going to get better." "Let me go," Angelica said. "Come with me." She got out of bed, as listless as a marionette. She no longer believed her husband. Arnold held her hand tightly. As they descended the stairs and then another to the basement, Angelica wondered if she had the strength to go upstairs. In the end, she didn't care about that either. What did it matter where she lay? It might as well be on the floor in the hall. In the basement, Arnold opened the very door which was usually closed and behind which his old things were kept, as he had said. Now Angelica saw that the room was completely empty, the cage. Her husband now held Angelica by both hands and spoke, intoning to her like a child. "If you behave like this, I won't be able to leave you alone. Do you understand? You could hurt yourself in that condition. There's plenty of opportunity for that up there in the house, and I can't let anything happen to you and the baby. You'll be seen by my psychiatrist friend, prescribe pills, and you'll live here. All the furniture, a mattress, and a night potty. Is that okay?" "Did you set up this torture room on purpose?" she asked. "No," he shrugged. "It's not uncommon for mansions to have a secret room like this. It's a place to hide if criminals break in, robbery, or something unexpected happens. This time my emergency is you. You want to get medicated so you'll lie there like a vegetable. Why do you need all this?" Angelica didn't expect to ask that question. Nor did Arnold. He was silent for a few moments. "Because you were mine," he finally said. "When you and I were married, I belong only to you. I never thought of leaving you or cheating on you. But you're always going off on me. But I won't let you go. You promised." "Arnold, but millions of people get divorced," Angelica said tiredly. "Why do you think our marriage is special? I think you're the one who's mentally ill, not me." "Be that as it may," he replied, holding back his anger. "You have a question to answer. Do you want to spend the time left before the birth in a human way, or do you want to be locked up here?" "It won't be human," Angelica sighed. I don't care. It's up to you." "All right," he said. "We'll give you another chance, but you have to eat tonight. Let's go upstairs." And Arnold helped his wife up the stairs, which she could not overcome alone. Angelique knew she had to wait until after the birth, but she could not have imagined the shock that awaited her. The young woman had packed a bag with things she might need at the hospital. If Arnold wished to check on her well, there were no secrets. Nightgowns, hygiene items, a few books. Still, as Angelica looked at that bag, it represented hope to her. That soon she would be able to get out of here. But when it was time to go to the hospital, Arnold said, "And you, my dear, will give birth at home." Angelica looked up and her eyes were as hurt as if he had hit her again. Yes, yes," continued her husband, "the doctor is on his way. What's the matter with you?" Before, only the poor gave birth in maternity hospitals. And for the rich, the midwives were invited to the house. It was the order of the day. "So I've arranged this luxury for you." "What luxury?" Angelique bit her lip in pain. "What about sterility? What if something goes wrong and you need an operation? There's no facilities at home." "If there are problems, then we will deal with them," Arnold said nonchalantly. "You are young, healthy. Everything should go as it should." To be honest, Angelica soon didn't care who her doctor was or whether sterility was ensured. For the next few hours, she felt like she was dying. The pain was so intense that the paramedics who arrived had to give her anesthesia. Maybe they did it out of mercy, or maybe Arnold insisted, not wanting his wife's screams to be heard across the street. Even though their house was at the edge of the forest, but still, when Angelica regained consciousness, she did not immediately realize where she was. Nothing hurt. It was blissfully light. For a while she thought that she had returned to her childhood and was lying on her bed in her parents' house. Then her vision began to focus, and she saw a dark red curtain. It took another effort to remember everything. Someone had entered the room. Angelica turned her head and saw Arnold. His face was as impassive and calm as ever. Unbelievable. "Who was born?" She asked faintly. A girl. We have a girl. Show her to me, Angelica asked, and mentally added, not us but me. Then said Arnold, I want you to show her to me. Angelique's old stubbornness has definitely returned after all. It was me who gave birth to her. Now you sleep, your strength will recover, and then I'll show you everything, Arnold promised. Angelica knew that it was useless to ask, and she was not able to get up and go in search of her daughter. She was very weak. As soon as she closed her eyes, she fell into either sleep or unconsciousness. Arnold had not deceived her. When Angelica woke up feeling a little better, Arnold had brought her baby. Angelica was afraid to take her daughter in her arms, so small, so tiny. The newborn's head had to be carefully supported. Is she all right? Angelica asked, not realizing that she was crying. She put her daughter to her breast. What did the doctor say? The girl is healthy. Let her be Veronica, Angelica decided, gazing at the baby's face. She didn't need hope, something shaky and uncertain and maddening. She needed a firm belief that they would both get out of this nightmarish quest. All right, Arnold agreed. There was no crib in the room, and as the newborn dozed off, Angelica looked around helplessly for somewhere to put her. Come on, I'll carry the baby to her room. Arnold held out his arms. I want her to live with me. Angelica hesitated. All right, tomorrow we'll move the crib in here and we'll move everything around. But you need to sleep well tonight so you won't be awakened by a baby crying. You need to rest. Don't you realize I'll hear it from any room in the house? But still, Angelique gave her husband the baby, and he was right. Her strength was so exhausted that night she slept soundly and without dreams. When she awoke in the morning, she realized she could try to get up. Arnold had brought her breakfast, coffee, toast, boiled egg. Bring Veronica, Angelica demanded, and noticing the strange expression on his face, she threatened, or I'll definitely go on a hunger strike. Veronica doesn't live in this house anymore, he said. What? Angelica's heart literally stopped. Don't be so frightened. She's still doing fine. Only she will live somewhere else, and other people will take care of her. And if you want to see her someday, you don't do anything stupid. It's the surest way to keep you in line, he added with a chuckle. Angelica looked at him with horror. Are you human? She asked, shocked. What are you? There was a sneer on his face. You're just a garden variety lunatic. I understand that you are excited. There have been so many changes in your life. But control your behavior and your words if you don't want to live in a madhouse for the rest of your life. You won't see Veronica there. Her husband bowed slightly and left. From that day on, Angelica's personal hell began. After the hysterics, so violent that she could have died or gone mad, there was a break in her character. It was as if she lost her will, became submissive, like a dog that wants to earn its master's approval. She now lived day by day, fulfilling all his wishes, so that on the first day of every month he threw on her lap another photograph of Veronica. Here the little girl learned to raise her head, turn over, sit up. Here she takes her first time in steps along the sofa. Angelica tried to understand where her daughter was, based on her surroundings. But in the photographer's field of vision, there was only a white wall and this very worn sofa of cherry color. And, of course, the child. Angelica had no doubt that it was her daughter. Although she had only seen the baby once, it was undoubtedly her. Angelica recognized her own features in Vera's face. The same shape of the nose, the cut and color of the eyes, except that the girl's hair was blonde, like Arnold. From the outside, it might have seemed that Angelica's situation was now better. She began to leave the house, always in the company of her husband, but still. Now the two of them were seen in cafes, in stores, noticed walking in city parks. But Angelica perceived this freedom as humiliation. If before she nurtured in herself hatred of her husband and considered him crazy, but now she had to pretend to be a happy wife. Arnold had warned her if she tried to fudge. As he said, she would never see the child again. And Angelica knew her husband was capable of carrying out his threat. Even if she succeeded in getting to the police and Arnold was apprehended, he simply would not reveal the secret where the girl was. How long will this torture last? Angelica asked herself wistfully, and will it ever end? Would her husband abuse her for a year, 2, 3, or a lifetime? Her psyche was teetering on the brink. Angelique was afraid that this life would make her lose her mind. Now she was tied to Arnold much more tightly than before, by her word and the hope of seeing her daughter someday. She and Arnold were in the habit of going to the supermarket on Saturday nights and buying groceries for the week. One time, as Angelica was selecting items in the dairy department and Arnold walked a little farther to take a bottle of wine off the shelves, a stranger quickly passed the young woman but dropped a carton of milk into her cart. Angelica opened her mouth in surprise, but then she saw Sophia in the back of the store, who made a sign with her hand that everything was as it should be. Angelica nodded involuntarily. They could not approach each other. Arnold would have stopped it at once, and there was no telling what Angelica's punishment would be. Maybe he'd lock her in the basement or beat her up again. He often raised his hand against her, and Angelique had gotten used to the pain. She didn't scream or cry now. She only flinched like a dog kicked by a cruel master. When she and Arnold arrived home, the first thing Angelica did was examine the milk carton. On the bottom of it in pencil was written, "Your father is dying. No hope. Calls to say goodbye." And then all the skills Angelica had recently acquired went somewhere. She rushed to her husband. "I have to go home," she begged. He raised his eyebrows. "Why?" "My father is dying. I haven't seen him in years. I can never forgive myself if I don't say goodbye to him." "You're not the ultimate monster. Let me go for a few days. I'll come back, I swear to you. Or let's go together." He grabbed her chin. "How do you know about your father? Tell me." She just said the first thing that came into her head. "I met an acquaintance at the store, and she said," "Don't lie," he didn't believe it for a second. "First of all, you didn't talk to anyone there. Secondly, if someone had told you about your father, you would have told me right away. And you're just finding out now. Did someone hand you the phone? Did someone write you a note? Tell me." Angelique had no choice but to reveal her cards. Maybe then he'd take pity and let her go to her father. She showed him the unfortunate box. "I see," he squinted. "You're not going anywhere. Father can die just fine without you. Arnold, for God's sake." Angelica knelt in front of her husband. "Do you realize you'll do a terrible thing if you don't let me go? Fate can forgive a lot of things, but this is the kind of thing it punishes. The boomerang will come. It will be interesting to see it." His tone didn't even change. It remained the same, cold and mocking. "And for the fact that you wanted to deceive me like that. Next month you won't have a photo." Angelica had the second worst tantrum in her memory. She sobbed for hours, locked in her room. And when she did want to come out, she realized that Arnold's intention was not to let her out anytime soon. She spent about a week alone. It was a good thing the bedrooms shared a bathroom. At least Angelique was not thirsty. But her husband never brought her food. It was a real prison. The windows had bars to keep out burglars. The view was of a high fence with a forest beyond. Angelique didn't know when she'd be released, but when Arnold received a call to inform him that her father had died, her husband deliberately came to the door so she could hear his voice. Arnold expressed his condolences and said that unfortunately he and Angelica couldn't make it to the funeral, being very busy with work. "Oh, the will? Well, as soon as they have a moment to spare, they'll come and look at it." It seemed like a week. Angelica felt her mind was racing and she couldn't quite realize how many days had passed when Arnold unlocked the door. It was possible to go downstairs and eat something. After that, Angelica finally broke down. She became apathetic and indifferent to everything. She didn't care whether she stayed at home or followed her husband wherever he led her. Without lifting her head, she did her homework, but she did it carefully, like an automaton. And when the housework was finished, she would sit or lie motionless, staring at one point. You could not tell whether she was absorbed in her thoughts or in prostration. When Arnold spoke to her, she answered him. But she answered the question. She could not be expected to say anything else. The question remained, why did he want such a broken doll? But it was as if he was satisfied that he had brought her to such a state, that she was walking around like a mannequin with no feelings, no thoughts, no desires, that he had complete power over her. Something human appeared in Angelica's gaze only when her husband put another photograph of his daughter in front of her. She looked at it for a long time, and the expression of her eyes became sad. It was as if she were mentally talking to Veronica. Then she would put the picture in the album and put it in her dresser drawer. She knew if she kept taking out and looking at the pictures, Arnold would throw the album away, just as he had destroyed everything that was dear to her. So she picked it up once a month, only to put another picture in it. And so the years went by. Once in the conversation of the spouses flashed the number 18. When Veronica turns 18, I'll tell her about you, and then she'll decide for herself if she wants to see you. If she does, I won't object. Angelique decided to think of this day as a turning point in her imprisonment. After this day, she would either have her freedom and her daughter, or she would be gone. Now she knew that it was possible not to make any effort for this, not to take sin on her soul. She would leave simply out of longing and despair. In the last month before that date, she knitted a beautiful blue shawl. It had once been her favorite color, and she hoped her daughter would like it too. On the cherished day, she gave Arnold the package with the shawl, asking, "Give it to Veronica, from me." He grinned, but took the package. That day, he didn't come home for a long time. Angelica had no doubt that he had gone to Veronica's. After all, she was his daughter too, and celebrating her coming of age. When she heard the gates of the house open in the evening, she ran downstairs. "Well?" she asked. He could have taunted her, demanded, for example, that she serve him dinner first, but Arnold would not do that. He handed her the bag with the shawl. "Veronica doesn't want to know you." "Why?" Angelica whispered with only one lip. "Did you tell her what you did to me?" "I told her you left her, and now you're sorry and you want to make amends." "I never said a word to her about you before." Angelique didn't expect what happened next. She threw herself at her husband. Forgetting everything, she beat him with her fists ineptly and desperately, and screamed like a man who had been hurt intolerably. Arnold was so unprepared for this that it was only after a few seconds that he came to his senses. He twisted his wife and dragged her down to the basement. Angelica was lying on the floor. It was very difficult for her to move, and she did not want to. Not even to lift her head, not even to turn it. The only thing the woman wanted was for it to end here and now. She knew Arnold had locked the door from the outside, or rather, there was an English lock. Her husband pushed her inside and slammed the door shut. Sooner or later, he'd open it, or he wouldn't. It didn't matter. When Angelica tried to lift herself up, her head fell to the floor helplessly, and her broken nose bulled again. But Arnold had never beaten her to the point of mutilating her. I should think nothing irreparable had happened now, just a cruel lesson. In a little while, she'd be able to walk again. But things happened differently than Angelica had anticipated. When the door opened and Arnold saw his wife, even he apparently thought he had overdone it. He walked over to her and bent over. Later, it seemed to Angelica that it was not she who acted, but some force instead of her. She yanked her husband by the leg in a sudden, sharp movement, and when he lost his balance for a few moments, she jumped up and dashed for the door. Only when the lock clicked behind her back and her tormentor remained there, inside, did she catch her breath. Angelica could hear her husband banging on the door and yelling something, but she also knew that the door was solid and secure. Not even a man could kick it down. Nevertheless, she could not allow herself to gather herself quietly. She acted quickly, feverishly. She changed into jeans and a thin sweater, threw on a jacket. She stuffed a few changes of underwear and the essentials into her bag. She knew where the money and her husband's card were. She didn't need to cover her tracks. On the contrary, she wanted to make sure Arnold was punished. The money, the documents, everything seemed to be in place. The ordered cab arrived. Angelica automatically called her friend's address. If she would not be at home, then she should go to the hospital. But Sophia was home. She gasped when she saw Angelica with her bag on the doorstep. The friends hugged and cried and could not break the embrace. Then Sophia smeared Angelica's abrasions, put ice on the biggest bruise, made a sandwich and a cup of strong coffee. She wanted to pour cognac, but Angelica stopped her. "No, don't. First to the hospital to remove the beatings, and then to the police." That's what they did. Sophia didn't leave Angelica alone. She held her hand. It seemed to Angelica that Arnold was about to appear behind her back, calling her. She could hear his voice in her mind's eye, and took control of herself time after time, repeating that he himself from the secret room cannot get out of the secret room. Angelica had finished telling her story to Harry, and now sat looking out at the sea. What happened next? He asked after a moment's silence. Next, the police came to Arnold's house, and he was released from his confinement and immediately detained. There was a trial, and he got a shorter sentence than I expected. Only 2 years. I mean, they gave him more, but he was released after 2 years. When I heard about it, I left town right away. Right here, I'll have to go back soon. How have you been living all this time? I found out my father left me a nice inheritance, and I also found out that Arnold had put a pretty large sum of money in my account in the prenup. So money was no problem. That's good, because I could work for a while. I was in therapy. I was very close to losing my mind. Maybe that's why they gave Arnold so little. They thought I was out of my mind, and they thought I was saying a lot of things about him. Couldn't hide the beatings, though. And your daughter? My ex-husband never told me where she was. Not to the police, not to the court. Angelica shook her head, so I don't know anything. Wasn't he accused of kidnapping the child? He made it look like there was no child. Angelique said, there was no child, that's all. It's just my sick imagination. It's a miracle that thanks to the testimony of Sophia and other people I know, it was still possible to prove that he deprived me of my freedom. Why was he released so soon? Harry was trying to figure it out. It doesn't make sense. I bought an apartment. Angelica said I had to have somewhere to live. But now I can't imagine going back. He'll be walking the streets of the same city. He won't leave me alone. I think he's got some kind of obsession with me. Don't you want to move? Harry asked. To another city? Start from scratch again? A naked man on the ground? I don't have the strength for that. My father is dead. I have no relationship with my stepmother or stepbrothers. I only have a few girlfriends, and now I'll be forced to abandon them too. But when I found out he'd been released, I was terrified to come home. But Harry noticed that she was becoming calmer around him. Her face had rounded a little, lost its sickly thinness. Her hair began to grow back, and Angelica went to the hairdresser and got a hairstyle that suited her better than before. She even found a hobby of growing flowers. By the time winter came, the apartment looked like a winter garden. Perhaps it was the earthiness of age that had drawn her to the land. Angelica shrugged. When she returned, Harry often saw this picture of Angelique sitting in an armchair, as if in a green grotto of curly branches. A sconce was burning softly, and the woman was reading a book. Harry involuntarily noted that the woman remained beautiful in spite of all she had been through. If I ever get married, I'd like a mother-in-law like that, he thought, feeling that Angelica was gradually becoming a kindred spirit to him. But sometimes when he woke up in the middle of the night, he saw the light in the kitchen. So Angelica again had a terrible dream, in which the door opens quietly and enters her ex-husband. And now until morning she would sit, drink coffee and listen to the sound of footsteps on the stairs. She realized that these were far-fetched fears, but she couldn't help it. Angelique had taken nothing with her from Arnold's house except her personal belongings, a photo album, and a blue shawl she had knitted for her daughter. The shawl now hung in her room. Harry did not hide from her that he was trying to find her husband and daughter, but he did not tell her the details. And when the young man disappeared for days at a time, Angelica knew it had to do with the search, but never questioned too painfully. It would be intolerable for her to hope and then be disappointed. And so a year passed. Angelica already wanted to talk to Harry about what plans he was making for the summer. She wanted to go somewhere up north, maybe Karelia. She couldn't stand the heat. And she thought if the young man wanted to go, he could accompany her. If he had a girlfriend, he could take her with him. She would pay for the young people's room. Harry's presence gave her a semblance of family. But she didn't have time to talk about it. The day came when Harry knocked on her room. I need to talk to you. Angelica looked up with frightened eyes. Did you find out something bad? Did Arnold find me? Do you have to leave? Will you let me sit down? Sitting down in the chair opposite Angelica, Harry began to speak. I found out why your ex-husband was released. Not only because of that, of course, but that circumstance also played a major role. Arnold went blind. How? Angelique asked in a whisper. There, when he was serving time, there was a fight in the zone. He was beaten up badly. A concussion and blindness. He was in the hospital for a long time. And he'll never see again? The doctors are sure he won't, but I was wondering what he was. Why did he treat you like that? By the time you were married, he was already a rich, prosperous man. And Veronica? Did you find out anything about Veronica? Angelique interrupted. Wait a minute. I was sure that such behavior was more typical of a person from a marginal environment, but when I delved into all this, he really had a rough childhood. After his father left, the family lived in abject poverty. An old house, no heating, a stove and wood. The mother, whom Arnold loved very much, began to drink first, and then reach for other men. She would leave the house, spend the night somewhere, and the boy was left alone in the unheated rooms. He slept in his jacket when she came back drunk, often with something new. Bragging to her son about a new ring or a new dress, Arnold would ask, "Mom, why did you change me for someone else?" "You, Angelica, the whole life ahead of you," she replied, "and mine passes, and you can't give me anything now. So don't judge me for what I take from others." Maybe that's what gave him the incentive to get ahead at any cost, to become a wealthy man. It was an attempt to prove something to his mother, but it failed. When Arnold began to earn good money, his mother had already died. A life of debauchery is no good. And when he met you, all his childhood complexes were realized. His mother didn't belong to him. She was always slipping away from him, swapping him for someone else. So he decided to make you all his, at any cost. At first, he thought you'd be tied to him by a child together. But then he realized you could leave with a baby in your arms. So he separated you from your daughter. He knew there was no better blackmail than a daughter. He may or may not give her back to you. And as long as he has your daughter, you'll be at his mercy. Then why did he take my hope away? Tell me Veronica didn't want to hear from me. Harry shrugged. Maybe he'd gotten tired of playing that game after all these years. Maybe he just snapped. But he wasn't about to let you go. In your face, he was avenging his mother's childhood. Where did he hide Veronica? That's what tormented Angelique the most. Is she alive? He gave her up for adoption to strangers. Do you know anything about that? Harry was silent for a few moments, and the woman held her breath. You can't imagine who raised her. Who did? Your stepmother. He brought her the baby and assured her you'd given her up, and he's too busy working to raise a girl. Maria really did love your father. Her own sons have grown up, and she realized that she could not give the native granddaughter of the professor in an orphanage. So she raised Veronica. Arnold visited the girl, took pictures. Angelica had her hand on her throat. Does she really hate me and doesn't want to know? Is she at Maria's right now? Come with me, Harry suggested. I have something to show you, and I want you to know that I met Veronica and talked to her. Angelica had long ago given the young man the keys to her car, and now the car was waiting for them at the entrance. From excitement, the woman did not realize where they were going. The city ended, then the road turned into the forest. Finally, Harry stopped the car, and shocked Angelica recognized the place where she had once spent her honeymoon with her husband. The cottage by the lake. It had recently rained, and the air was filled with the smell of pine, earth, and leaves. There was a small pier next to the cottage. It was empty now. It seemed as if there was not a single living soul here, but it only seemed that way. Angelica did not immediately see a man sitting in an armchair on the platform in front of the cottage. He was gaunt, with gray hair and dark glasses. Angelica wouldn't have recognized Arnold, but her mind told her it was him. And next to him, leaning toward him, stood a girl. She was saying something to the old man, stroking his arm. Then the girl raised her head. She was as fair-haired as her mother, and with her noble features she resembled her grandfather. For a minute she and Angelica gazed at each other. Angelica wanted to walk towards Veronica, but realized she couldn't move. Her legs were failing. Harry, apparently sensing her condition, took her firmly under the elbow. You won't be angry that I'm being frivolous? He asked quietly. Angelica did not immediately understand what he was talking about. Veronica said something to her father and slowly walked towards them. The closer the girl came, the more Angelica's doubts dissipated. There were no tests needed here, no questions. This was her girl, the one she had given birth to and held in her arms only once in her life. 10 steps before reaching the niches, Veronica stopped, and only now Angelica noticed that on the shoulders of the girl is a blue open-work knitted shawl. It was the same one that had hung in Angelica's room a while ago, and looking at it, she believed that she would give it to her daughter someday.